My brother stole my girlfriend and got her pregnant. But when they got married and moved into their new house, they found out I was the owner and also his boss. Sometimes life throws punches you never see coming, but the ones that really destroy you are the blows that come from those you trust the most. That's how my story began. The day my brother, my own brother, decided to tear apart everything I had built with one selfish, deliberate choice. And no, this isn't some petty sibling rivalry. This was betrayal in its purest, most brutal form. Started with a phone call. I remember I was wrapping up some big projects at work when my phone buzzed. It was a close friend, the kind who always knows things you'd rather stay in the dark about. His voice was tense when he dropped the bomb. "Did you know Laura and your brother have been seeing each other behind your back?" The words hit me like a freight train. At first, I laughed, thinking it was some kind of sick joke. "That can't be true," I told myself. But as the details started coming out, it became impossible to deny. It was real. The person I had considered my closest ally had become the thief of my happiness. My brother, the life of every party, the golden child of the family, had decided that what I had with Laura was something he wanted too. And Laura, the woman I'd built dreams with, chose to betray me without a second thought. The worst part? They didn't even bother to hide it properly. Pictures on social media, brazen comments, even mutual friends who knew and stayed silent. It was as if the universe was conspiring to let me find out in the most humiliating way possible. When I confronted Laura, her response was a slap in the face. "It wasn't planned," she said, wearing an expression that was some twisted mix of guilt and justification. "Not planned? It takes a lot of conscious decisions to stab someone in the back like that." The most crushing part was her lack of fight for our relationship. She didn't even try to explain, to fix things. She just left me with a cocktail of emotions. Anger, sadness, and humiliation so deep it kept me awake at night. But the knockout blow came when I learned she was pregnant. And no, it wasn't mine. It was his. My brother hadn't just stolen my girlfriend. He was now starting a family with her. The irony of it all was suffocating. I had imagined a future with Laura, and now that future was happening. But without me, I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I made a decision right then and there to cut them both out of my life. I blocked their numbers, deleted them on social media, and poured myself into work, trying to distract myself. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. I knew our paths would cross again someday. They had broken something inside me, but they had also lit a fire I didn't know I had. It was a small flame at first, but it burned with a fierce determination. I was going to rise above this, no matter what. And when the time came, I'd show them that no matter how hard they tried to knock me down, I wasn't staying on the ground. After cutting all contact with them, I found myself in an emotional limbo. On one hand, I was devastated. On the other, an intense anger kept me from completely falling apart. But I wasn't going to sit around wallowing in sadness. If this betrayal had taught me anything, it was that no one was coming to save me. If I wanted to move forward, I'd have to do it on my own. Work became my sanctuary. I spent hours at the office, far more than necessary, trying to fill the void left by the betrayal. My coworkers noticed the change in me, but no one dared to ask. Maybe it was because they could see in my eyes that I wasn't in the mood to explain. Day by day, I built a routine that revolved around one singular goal: to overcome this and come out stronger. The funny thing about crises is that, while they seem like a tragedy at first, they can also become the push you need to transform yourself. I started seeing opportunities where I used to see problems. My boss, impressed by my dedication, assigned me a major project, one that could define my career. I threw myself into it completely, not just to prove my worth to others, but to show myself that I was still capable of achieving great things. If Laura and my brother thought they had destroyed me, they were wrong. Outside of work, I made significant changes too. I joined a gym, something I'd been putting off for years. At first, it was just a way to burn off all the pent-up energy, but it soon became more than that. With every weight I lifted, I felt like I was also lifting a bit of the emotional weight I carried. Looking at myself in the mirror, I began to recognize someone different, someone stronger, both physically and mentally. As the months passed, I started feeling like I was regaining control of my life. I didn't want Laura or my brother to continue being the main characters in my story. So, I also sought out new people to surround myself with. I joined a group of entrepreneurs who met on weekends to share ideas. That's where something life-changing happened. I came up with the idea to start my own business. I'd always dreamed of it, but had never taken it seriously. This time was different, though. I had a clear goal: to build something that was entirely mine, something no one could take away. With that idea in mind, I started planning. At first, it seemed impossible. I didn't have enough savings, and the late nights spent crunching numbers, doing research, and pitching to investors felt endless. But for the first time in months, I felt like I had something that gave me hope. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments when frustration overwhelmed me, days when doubts came rushing back, whispering in my ear that maybe Laura had been right to leave, that maybe I wasn't good enough. But in those moments, I remembered the pain they had caused, and that drove me to keep going. I wasn't going to let the memory of their betrayal dictate my future. Bit by bit, my vision began to take shape. I recruited a small team of people who believed in the project as much as I did, and together we started building from scratch. Every small victory felt like a personal triumph, but the best part was the realization that, for the first time in a long while, I wasn't fighting to prove anything to anyone but myself. Meanwhile, Laura and my brother remained out of my radar. Occasionally, someone would casually mention that things weren't going as well for them as they initially seemed. But I didn't want to know more. I had too many important things in motion to waste my energy on them. Deep down, though, I knew our story wasn't over. There was something in the air, a sense that the past would resurface. This time, however, I'd be ready. I don't know if it was fate, karma, or just the natural cycle of things, but just when I thought I had left it all behind, the past decided to reappear with a vengeance. My business, which had started as a small, almost experimental project, was now growing faster than I could manage. Orders were piling up, customers were happy, and the numbers were proof that things were finally going my way. I was on the brink of something I never thought I'd achieve: financial independence and, more importantly, self-respect. It was during this peak moment that I received a message that knocked the wind out of me. It was from Laura. Not a simple hi or casual check-in. No, it was a long text, dripping with a tone that mixed nostalgia with desperation. She wrote something like, "I've been thinking about you, about us, and what we had. I think I made a mistake, as if betraying my trust and destroying everything we had together could be reduced to an oops, my bad." My first instinct was to ignore her. I had erased her from my life, and I had no intention of reopening that door. But even though I didn't respond, my mind couldn't stop spinning. What was she trying to pull? Did she really think she could waltz back into my life with a cheap apology? I decided not to dwell on it and instead focused on what truly mattered: my business and the new life I had worked so hard to build. But Laura wasn't giving up. A few days later, she started calling me. Not once, but repeatedly. Always at the end of the day when the office was closing and I was exhausted. At first, I declined her calls, but then she began leaving voicemails. Hearing her voice again after all this time felt like reopening a wound I thought had healed. She said things like, "I know I messed up, but I've realized no one understands me like you do." It was surreal. This was the same woman who shattered my world for the illusion of wealth, now practically begging for a second chance. A couple of days later, I found out why she was so insistent. One of our mutual friends called to fill me in on her situation. Her relationship with my brother had completely fallen apart. I wasn't surprised, but the details left me stunned. Apparently, my brother had spent every dime he had trying to impress Laura, but the debts eventually caught up with him. The arguments started, and before long, they split up. Laura was left alone, broke, and, apparently, full of regret. That revelation hit me like a hurricane. Was that what she wanted? To come crawling back because she'd hit rock bottom? The very thought filled me with a mix of bitter laughter and simmering rage. Did she really think she could just walk back into my life as if nothing had happened? But instead of getting angry, I decided to look at it differently. This wasn't a problem. It was an opportunity to prove to myself just how far I had come. Laura wasn't an obstacle. She was proof that I was no longer the man she had left behind. That's when I decided to take control of the situation. If she wanted to talk, I would listen, but not to reconcile. No, I wanted her to see firsthand the man I had become. I wasn't the insecure guy who let others define his worth anymore. I now had something she could never take away: pride in my accomplishments and the certainty that my life was better without her. When I finally agreed to meet her, I did it on my terms. I chose a simple coffee shop, far from my work or personal environment. I didn't want her to catch even a glimpse of my recent success. She arrived late, dressed in what was clearly an attempt to recapture the polished image she had always cared about more than anything else. But I wasn't the man she remembered. My priorities had shifted, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely in control. As I listened to her talk about her mistakes and how much she missed what we had, I couldn't help but notice how empty her words sounded. It was like she was reciting a script, trying to manipulate me the way she had before. But I wasn't the same person, and this time the power was entirely in my hands. Laura arrived late to the cafe, a habit she hadn't shaken since our relationship. While I waited, sipping my tea slowly, I used the time to take in my surroundings. It wasn't a fancy place, and that was intentional. I wanted to keep this meeting neutral, almost insignificant, like just another task on my schedule. But when she finally walked in, her entrance was anything but low-key. She was trying way too hard to make an impression, probably hoping to remind me of the person she used to be. Her carefully chosen outfit screamed success, but her eyes betrayed her. They carried an unease I'd never seen before, a crack in the confidence she always exuded. We greeted each other awkwardly. There was no hug, no polite kiss on the cheek like there might have been in the past. Just a cold nod, enough to set the distance between us. I sat back, arms crossed, waiting for her to start talking. I wanted to hear what she had to say, but I was also measuring her every word, every gesture. And then she began. Her speech opened with an apology, but it lacked any real sincerity. I could tell because it was more about justifying her actions than acknowledging the hurt she had caused. She talked about feeling pressured, about falling for my brother's false promises of an easier life. According to her, she'd learned her lesson. But what stood out the most was how she twisted the narrative to paint herself as a victim of her own choices. She said things like, "Your brother promised me the world, but it was all lies. I didn't realize what I was losing until it was too late." While she spoke, I barely reacted. I kept my face neutral, even though my mind was a whirlwind of indignation and satisfaction. Did she honestly think her weak excuse for remorse would be enough? What she didn't know, and what I wasn't about to tell her, was that her sob story only confirmed what I already suspected. Laura wasn't there because she missed me as a person. She missed the stability I had provided. To her, I wasn't a partner, I was an opportunity. Then came the part one was waiting for. With a tone that sounded almost rehearsed, she said she thought maybe we could start over. She asked if we could forget the past and focus on building something new, together. It was almost laughable, like she'd pulled the lines straight from a cheap soap opera. She looked at me with those pleading eyes, the kind that probably worked on others, hoping I'd fall for her all over again. But I didn't. Instead of responding right away, I took a slow sip of my tea, letting the silence settle between us. Laura started fidgeting, adjusting her hair, moving her hands, clearly uncomfortable. When I finally broke the silence, it wasn't with the words she was expecting. Rather than engaging with her proposal, I casually changed the subject to something trivial. I talked about the weather, my work, and how much my life had improved since she left. I dropped subtle hints about my success, not to brag, but just enough for her to notice. I could see the confusion in her eyes. Laura wasn't used to being ignored or worse, being irrelevant. And although she didn't say it out loud, her expression said everything. Every word I spoke was a reminder that she had made the wrong choice and was now facing the consequences. The best part? I didn't have to raise my voice or say anything cruel to make her understand. My calm demeanor, my confidence, and my indifference were punishment enough. By the end of our conversation, I left no room for false hope. There were no promises of reconciliation, no sweet words to cling to, just a cold, "Thanks for meeting up," and a quick, "Take care." As she walked away, it was clear she had expected something else, something she never got. For the first time, I had the upper hand, and she knew it. When Laura walked out of the cafe, her steps carried a mix of confusion and defeat. But if she thought the story ended there, she was sorely mistaken. There was one card left to play, a truth she didn't yet know, and it would flip her entire perspective on everything she believed. It wasn't a plan. It was simply how fate lined up perfectly to reveal the truth. A few weeks later, my parents invited me to a family gathering at their house. They insisted I attend, saying they had something important to share. I assumed it was some kind of gesture to mend old wounds, or maybe just an excuse to see me after so long. Little did I know that this gathering would set the stage for a climax neither I nor anyone else could have foreseen. I arrived on time, dressed sharply as though I were heading to an important event. Something about the atmosphere felt different, heavy with tension, though I couldn't quite pinpoint why. As I entered the main room, there they were, Laura and my brother, sitting together but clearly uncomfortable. Laura avoided looking at me, and my brother forced a smile so stiff it was almost comical. The contrast with my relaxed demeanor was stark, and everyone noticed. The conversation started lightly but quickly became more interesting. My father, never one to beat around the bush, began discussing the family's recent accomplishments. Then, with an almost casual tone, he dropped the bombshell. I had purchased the company where my brother worked. Yes, after everything that had happened, I now owned the business where my brother was just another employee. It wasn't revenge, though I won't deny the poetic justice. It was purely a strategic business move, but the added irony was deeply satisfying. The announcement hit like a thunderclap. My brother visibly tensed, struggling to keep his composure. Laura, meanwhile, looked completely blindsided. Her eyes darted between my father and me as though she were trying to verify that this wasn't some elaborate joke. But the real icing on the cake came when my father added, almost innocently, that I also owned the house where they lived. Yes, the same house my brother and Laura had chosen together after their wedding. The effect was immediate. My brother, always so arrogant, now looked small and vulnerable. And Laura, who had always exuded confidence and control, was completely out of her depth. They were at a loss for words. Watching them realize how their past decisions had come back to haunt them was both surreal and satisfying. I didn't say much in that moment. I let my father's words and the awkward silence speak for themselves. My mother, ever the empathetic one, tried to ease the tension, but there wasn't much she could do. The truth was too sharp, too undeniable. Laura and my brother were trapped in a web of consequences they had spun themselves, and now there was no escaping. As the gathering wound down, Laura approached me. Her demeanor had shifted entirely. Gone was the confident woman who had left me for someone better. In her place was someone desperate, clinging to the hope that there might still be a way to salvage her dignity. She asked to speak privately, as though she believed there was something left between us to fix. But I was no longer the man she had walked away from. I had clarity, strength, and resolve, things I had gained in her absence. There was no room for her in the life I had built. Our confrontation was brief but revealing. For the first time, I said everything I had kept bottled up for months. Not with anger, but with a calmness that left her completely unarmed. I told her my success wasn't about proving anything to her, but about proving something to myself. I explained how my life had improved since she left and made it clear that I had no interest in revisiting the past. Her tears and pleas didn't change a thing. The door she had closed was one I had no intention of reopening. After that family meeting, everything changed. It was as if the veil that had hidden Laura and my brother's true intentions for so long had finally lifted. From that moment on, our lives went in completely opposite directions. Laura couldn't accept the reality of her loss. In the days following the confrontation, she tried to contact me repeatedly. Calls, messages, even showing up at my office a couple of times. Her excuses ranged from remorse for her actions to absurd justifications, claiming it was all a mistake. But I had no intention of giving in, not out of pride, but because I'd learned to value something far more important: my peace of mind and self-respect. Forgiveness is one thing, but knowing who deserves to stay in your life is another. She wasn't one of those people. My brother, on the other hand, chose silence. Whether it was shame or a bruised ego, he stopped reaching out to me entirely. Professionally, however, he couldn't escape my presence. As the owner of the company, I began attending key meetings, and he had no choice but to sit in the same room, forced to acknowledge that he now worked for me. I never set out to make him feel small, but I wasn't going to downplay my success either. The tension was palpable, and every time he avoided eye contact, I knew deep down he regretted what he'd done to our relationship. As for me, life kept moving forward. I got back into my hobbies, strengthened relationships with friends and family who truly mattered, and, most importantly, I learned to enjoy my own company. During one of those peaceful days, I met someone new. She was different. Someone who wasn't interested in what I had, but in who I was. The relationship started slowly, without pressure, and I quickly realized how genuine she was. For the first time in years, I felt truly valued for what really mattered. Meanwhile, Laura and my brother began to feel the consequences of their decisions. The luxury they had dreamed of quickly disappeared. The house they shared was nothing more than an empty symbol, a constant reminder that it wasn't theirs. The rumors about what had happened in our family spread, and soon, even their closest friends started distancing themselves. It was as if everything they had tried to build on lies and betrayal was crumbling. One day, months later, Laura reappeared. This time, not at my office or a family event, but at a cafe I frequented. She looked different, worn down, as if life's blows had finally caught up with her. She asked for 5 minutes, and although my initial instinct was to refuse, I decided to listen. Her words were a mix of regret and desperation. She admitted to her mistakes, to her selfishness, and said she now understood what she had lost. But I didn't need her apology. I listened in silence, and when she finished, I calmly told her there were no hard feelings, but there also wouldn't be any second chances. As I said goodbye to Laura that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. There was no anger, no pain, no desire for revenge. I had moved on, and with that, I had freed myself from the weight she and my brother had once represented. The following years were the best of my life. My relationship with that special someone grew naturally and beautifully. My company reached new heights of success, and I finally felt I had found my place in the world. Laura and my brother went their separate ways, but their decisions led them down difficult paths. Though our story was marked by conflict, it also taught me the importance of resilience, dignity, and, above all, the value of moving forward without looking back. This isn't a story of revenge, even though it might seem like one. It's a story about how people's choices always have consequences and how, in the end, life has a way of balancing the scales. And that, my friends, is a lesson everyone should learn. Thank you for joining me in this story full of emotions and lessons. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and if you've experienced something similar. See you in the next story. Take care.